We hope you enjoy today's story. The protagonist, Nancy Moore, was 28 years old and employed in the accounting department of an insurance company. The time was 3 p.m. When her husband, Jack, called her, Nancy inquired as to whether he was working overtime. Nancy sensed something was amiss in Jack's voice. "Are you okay, Jack?" she asked, feeling a slight sense of concern. "What's going on?" Jack replied that he had come home early and wanted to know if she would be there by 5. "No overtime today, dear?" Nancy inquired. "Do you want me to leave now?" "Don't worry," Jack replied. "I'm just going to rest for now. See you later." Nancy was certain that something was troubling Jack. She immediately proceeded to her superior's office. "Today, we need to review some files during overtime," Alan Perkins informed Nancy with a cheerful expression. "Say anything, Alan. I'm here to request permission to leave early." "Are you okay, Alan?" He frowned. "I'm fine, Jack. I think he's not feeling well. He just called me from home." "Do what you need to do, Nancy. We can discuss it further next time." She looked at her boss and nodded. When Nancy entered the house, she found Jack dozing on the couch. "I'm home, dear. Are you feeling okay?" "Indeed," Jack replied, rising from his seated position. "I am merely fatigued." "You have returned from work at an early hour," he observed, glancing at the timepiece. "I am aware that you, Jack Moore, are troubled. There is a matter that requires our discussion," Jack stated, turning his gaze to meet Nancy's. "We must converse." "Please, Jack," Nancy implored, her eyes brimming with distress. "I am reluctant to receive any unfortunate tidings." A deep breath. "What do you want to talk about, Jack?" she inquired, her voice betraying her fear. "I don't know where to start," he replied, his tone indicating a lack of confidence. "Perhaps we should begin by acknowledging that we have been drifting apart lately," she suggested. "I'll be honest with you, Nancy. I have fallen out of love with you. In accordance with our discussion, I intend to have our first child by the beginning of next year. We plan to purchase our own house. Jack, I must inform you that I have met someone." "Nancy, you were unable to contain your emotions. I am referring to a young woman with whom I am in love. I am sorry for the abrupt manner in which I am conveying this information, but it is necessary." "How could you do this to me and to us?" "Nancy, I am still attempting to process the information that has been presented to me. We have been acquainted for 5 years and have been married for 3 of those 6 months. You have undergone a transformation and have begun to neglect me." "I have never neglected you, Jack. I have consistently been available to you. You initiated your participation in weekly overtime work, sometimes twice a week. However, Jack, I was engaged in this activity for our mutual benefit, as we require the funds to purchase a house. Subsequently, you began your weekly social engagements with your colleagues. You then proceeded to engage in shopping activities on a weekly basis, allocating approximately 2 hours per Saturday to this pursuit. I invest a considerable amount of effort into my work, Jack. I require a brief period of respite for my own well-being. Have you ever considered my perspective, Jack? Instead of meeting with your colleagues, we could have scheduled a weekly date on Saturdays. We could have done so." Nancy gazed at the floor, suddenly aware of her actions. "Please, Jack, I love you. We can resolve this. 3 months prior, when I discussed these issues with you, you were visibly upset. You even raised your voice at me. Do you recall? I am genuinely remorseful, Jack. Had I heard you 3 months ago, I would have perceived it differently. Now, I recognize that I was solely preoccupied with—" "Please, Jack, allow me one more opportunity to demonstrate my sincerity. I am prepared to work on our marriage. 3 months ago, I was experiencing a profound sense of depression during my lunch break. At that time, a woman approached me and sat next to me. She works in a different department. She noticed that I was crying and initiated a conversation with me a few days later. She inquired about the source of my distress, and I proceeded to divulge the entirety of my emotional burden. Someone became a source of emotional support and solace. Is she the one? Yes, Nancy, she is. Gradually, we felt an emotional attraction and eventually fell in love with each other. What's her name? What does she do? Nancy asked, tears streaming down her face. Her name and what she does aren't important. It's better if you don't know. Were you too close? Yes, Nancy. Nancy expressed her sorrow, inquiring about the last time they had engaged in sexual intercourse. Jack responded that it had been a month ago, but it was not a romantic encounter. It was merely a brief sexual act due to Nancy's fatigue. Over the past 6 months, Nancy has consistently exhibited fatigue, leading to only 3 instances of sexual intercourse. Jack acknowledged that he should have inquired about Nancy's desire for sexual intimacy. He should have done something. Sex is a natural part of a couple's life. It occurs spontaneously. There is no need to inquire about it. She expressed her frustration with him, indicating that he was not fulfilling her needs. Nancy frowned. She engages in behaviors that he consistently refuses to do. Jack continued, "She always pleases me. She likes to caress me, which I enjoy very much. Things you never did, but I never knew you." Nancy attempted to argue as well, allowing him to enter through the rear entrance. He had consistently refused this request due to his aversion to sexual intercourse in a state of uncleanliness. Since their union, he had persistently attempted to persuade her to engage in this practice, yet she had consistently declined. Consequently, Nancy surpassed him in sexual prowess. He observed that she derived greater pleasure from their encounters. "I endeavor to identify the sensitive areas of my anatomy. I regret, Jack, that I am unable to satisfy your sexual needs. I will be leaving you tomorrow. I filed for divorce due to irreconcilable differences today. We have divided our savings equally. We will retain our respective vehicles. We both maintain gainful employment, so there is no question of financial distress. The lease on this residence expires in a few months. I will remain here tonight. It would be advisable for you to move into the guest room. You should contact your parents and provide them with a full account of the situation. I assume you will be moving in with them. Will she be moving in here in the meantime? No, she will not. She is reluctant to come into contact with your belongings, furniture, or anything else that might remind her of you and our time together. In fact, we have already identified an apartment in a new complex. We have chosen an apartment. The building will be ready in a couple of months, which is convenient for me since I'll need to move out of here around the same time. That is precisely where I had planned to move and wanted to convince Jack to buy an apartment there." Nancy inquired, "Why don't you move in with her?" "Nancy, I have a roommate in my 2-bedroom apartment." The couple initially decided not to bring any third parties into the relationship. As a result, they were forced to book a room in a motel, and on occasion, they even slept in the back seat of Jack's car. He expressed his love for Nancy and desire to spend the rest of his life with her, hoping to grow old together. He inquired about the possibility of working on their marriage. He was willing to overlook her infidelity, but he wanted to discuss it. "I am aware of the fact that I have been unfaithful to you for the past month. I am prepared to accept the consequences of my actions, and I will not bring it up again. I will give you everything that she gives you, and I will never refuse you anything. We can go to counseling if you wish, but unfortunately, Nancy, I have already made my decision." Jack stood me up. "I am going to take my things to the guest room and get some rest. What if I refuse the divorce? I will fight it. You will spend a lot of money on attorney fees, and in the worst case, I will just leave with her. I will remain married to you. Can't do that. It's illegal. There's no law in this country that can force me to stay here with you." Jack's departure was met with a vehement objection from Nancy. She promptly contacted her parents and provided a concise account of the circumstances. In a matter of minutes, her parents were seated beside her in the living room. "How could he do this to you?" John Nani's father was visibly enraged. He was adamant that 3 years of marriage should not be discarded on the grounds of negligence. Mary then proceeded to admonish her husband for his failure to communicate effectively with her and to work out their differences. She further asserted that she was responsible for the current situation. Nancy, overcome with emotion, sought solace in her mother's embrace. She acknowledged that her own neglect had contributed to her husband's decision to leave. Jan, however, was adamant that he needed to speak with his estranged spouse. He requested that she call him, but his father interjected, stating that he was currently resting and that they could speak in a couple of days when she had calmed down. Mary inquired as to whether Nancy would be packing her belongings and accompanying them. Nancy responded that she would not be leaving, and her mother offered assistance. Nancy stated that she would attempt to reconcile with her father. The parents expressed confusion, inquiring as to whether Nancy was certain. Nancy affirmed her resolve, and the parents agreed to wait a few days before taking further action. They advised Nancy to contact them if anything changed. Nancy proceeded to her room and wept until she fell asleep. The following night, she arose and proceeded to the kitchen, where she discovered an empty pizza box was situated adjacent to the receptacle for refuse. He did not rouse me for the evening repast. Instead, he procured sustenance for himself alone. Nancy believed she imbibed a glass of water and returned to her chamber. The following morning, as she exited her room, she heard the garage door close with a resounding slam and Jack's vehicle accelerate rapidly away. She prepared herself and proceeded to her place of employment before the midday meal. Alan Perkins, her superior, summoned Nancy into his office. He inquired as to whether she had been behaving in a peculiar manner since that morning and observed that she appeared to have been weeping. He then proceeded to inquire as to the cause of her distress. In a state of distress, Nancy informed Jack that she was contemplating divorce. He was taken aback to learn that she had discovered that he had been unfaithful and had formed a romantic attachment with a colleague at the company where they both worked. Nancy was visibly distraught. Jack, in turn, sought solace in the arms of a younger woman who worked at the same company. Nancy was granted the option of taking as many days off as she needed. She expressed a preference for remaining at work, but stated that she would not be staying late. Jack's preferred culinary creation was present in the kitchen, exuding a distinctive aroma. He proceeded directly to his room without uttering a word to Nancy. Later, he emerged from his room, having washed up and changed clothes. "I have a date tonight," he informed Nancy. "I prepared dinner for both of us," he added. Nancy was visibly distressed. "It would be preferable if you did not cook for me, as we will be dining separately from now on," she replied. "As you wish, Jack," she concluded. "When should I expect you back?" she inquired. "I am unsure of my return date," he replied. Nancy proceeded to the door, where she expressed her affection for Jack. Tears streamed down her face. Jack closed the door behind him. The following day, when Nancy returned home, Jack was already there. Nancy put away her purse and proceeded to the kitchen to pour herself a glass of water. The doorbell rang. "For you, Jack," she said, without looking at him. She frowned and proceeded to open the door for a man in a suit. "Are you Mrs. Nancy Moore?" the man inquired. "Yes, I am," she replied. "You've been served." He handed her a manila envelope. "Have a good evening, ma'am," the man said as he turned and walked away. Nancy nearly fainted as a result of the unexpected encounter. She took the envelope and, in order to maintain her composure, had to lean against the wall. "Please sign this and let's move on," Jack said to her. "Tell me what I'm supposed to think about how good we used to have it and how you ended it. Believe me, the time I'm spending with her now is much better than what we had." "Just sign the papers," Jack said. He went to his room, and Nancy sat down, trembling hands opened the envelope. She looked through the documents and signed them later. When she entered her room, she heard Jack talking on the phone. His door was open. "Yes, baby," he said. "She was served this afternoon. The countdown has started. I love you too, honey. You're going to stop. Taking the pills right now is a prudent decision. We can proceed with the marriage ceremony immediately following the dissolution of the divorce, given your current state of pregnancy. You will undoubtedly look exquisite in your wedding dress, particularly when we engage in sexual intercourse within the confines of your white dress. I am overcome with arousal at the mere thought of it." Nancy proceeded to enter her room and close the door behind her. "If only I could turn back time," she uttered to herself. The following day, she awoke at an early hour, left the documents on the kitchen table, and proceeded to her place of employment. She contacted her parents and informed them of the circumstances that had transpired. They requested that she gather her belongings and vacate the premises. She replied that she would do so at a later time and informed Alan Perkins that she had signed the divorce papers. He inquired as to whether she was experiencing a challenging period. He inquired as to whether she could fathom the extent of the devastation she was currently enduring. Nancy was visibly distraught. He advised her not to allow herself to be humiliated and encouraged her to recognize that she was still young and that life might yet offer her other opportunities. Jack had been her future, and she had effectively ruined that possibility. Would she like to go for a drink after work to relieve some of the pressure? Alan Perkins inquired. The situation had originated with drinks after work. She turned and walked away. As time passed, Nancy's behavior at work became increasingly erratic. Jack returned home from his restaurant dinner later than usual. He prepared sandwiches and did his own shopping. Nancy began to act in a more provocative manner at home, wearing shorts and a tank top without a bra on occasion. She would sometimes enter the kitchen wrapped in a towel when Jack was there, playing music that he enjoyed. She would also lean in close to him. She consistently waited for him in the evening, attempting to initiate conversation. However, he often refused, feigning disinterest. He was fatigued and retired to his room, but on occasion, he would sit and listen to her. She never discussed the other woman. She felt it was necessary to bring up their shared history, during which he would display a sparkle in his eyes and a smile on his face. However, he would then change the subject on weekends. Jack would mow the lawn or engage in other activities to occupy his time, thus avoiding Nancy in the evenings. He would go out alone and return very late. One Friday, she called Jack and invited him on a date that evening for dinner and dancing. He agreed. Nancy was visibly happier, and even her colleagues noticed the change. She returned home early and prepared for the evening ahead. She polished her nails and chose the dress Jack liked the most, a turquoise pleated dress with short sleeves. She styled her hair and carefully applied makeup. They had a nice dinner, talking about everything except their actual situation. At some point, Nancy felt that everything that had happened in the past 6 months was like a bad dream and that she had just woken up, leaving it all behind. It felt as if they were still madly in love. The couple, previously in love, proceeded to the dance floor after dinner. A man approached Nancy and invited her to dance. She looked at Jack, who gave a shrug, and then declined the invitation. The man walked away. Nancy then asked Jack, "Will you dance with me?" Jack stood, took her hand, and led her to the dance floor. They danced for 5 songs. In unison, they continued to move in time with the music as they were returning to their table. Without a word, Nancy pulled Jack onto the dance floor, pressed herself against him, and rested her head on his shoulder. He felt her breath on his neck for weeks. She had wanted to hold him, feel his body next to hers, and engage in passionate sexual intercourse with him. She pressed herself tightly against him and felt the bulge in his pants. She held Jack close and slowly swayed her hips, rubbing against him. She was unconcerned with whether people were watching or what they might think. She was with her partner and could do as she wished. She suddenly pressed forward against Jack's groin, and he moaned. She kissed his neck and felt herself becoming aroused. "Let's go home," Jack whispered in her ear. Nancy smiled on the way back. Jack focused on driving while Nancy sat and hummed the songs they had just danced together. After Jack parked the car in the garage, Nancy ran to her room, left the door open, undressed, and lay naked on the bed, waiting for her husband. Jack walked down the hall, past Nancy's room without even glancing at it, and went to the guest room. Nancy proceeded to the guest room, where she discovered Jack in a state of undress. She immediately sought him out, but instead of greeting her, he rushed past her without so much as a word. Nancy followed him into the room, where she found him shirtless. She demanded to know what had transpired. Jack was visibly distressed. He appeared to be experiencing a high level of sexual arousal, a fact that Nancy was keenly aware of. She was also aroused, and she sensed that Jack was similarly affected. "Dance floor, Nancy. We are getting a divorce. It is not possible for us to be intimate, as we are still married and I am still your wife. Please, darling, make love to me." She approached Jack and tried to hug him, but he avoided her and sat on his bed. "Take what's yours, Jack. You can have every inch of my body. Do whatever you want with me. I am all yours. I will never refuse you anything." She sat next to him. She attempted to kiss his lips, but he turned away and kissed her cheek instead. "Please, Jack, do not abandon me. Do not initiate divorce proceedings. I love you. I am merely requesting your forgiveness. I am aware that we can resolve this matter. Let us simply disregard the preceding 6 months as if they never occurred. You are capable of doing this, Jack, because you do not hold me in contempt. It is somewhat late in the day, Nancy." "It is. It is never too late, Jack. Your vulnerability led you to become susceptible to someone else because of the situation I created. I was foolish and selfish. I understand my mistakes and promise that they will never happen again. I will be the best wife on this earth." Jack did not say anything. His eyes were distant. Nancy knelt before him and took his hands in hers. "I will be your servant, Jack. It is my wish. I command you to beat me daily, to punish me for my actions, and to humiliate me. However, Jack, I ask that you remain my husband until death do us part." Jack looked at her intently, his eyes conveying a multitude of emotions. "Why can't you?" he demanded. Nancy was enraged. "Because I can't betray her," she replied, her voice rising in intensity. "That woman is a home wrecker. You see that, don't you? She seduced you and exploited your vulnerability. Despite being aware of your marital status, she initiated sexual intercourse with you. How can you be certain that she will not betray you? It is highly unlikely that she would do so, regardless of your assurances. What will you do if she does? She will always be more to me than that. With a resigned expression, she proceeded to the door and stopped. I am tired, Jack. This divorce is causing me immense distress. Tomorrow morning, I'll call my parents to come and help me pack my things, she said, not facing him. I'm truly sorry for my mistakes. Please forgive me for the pain I caused you. I wish I had been wiser. I wish you a happy life with your future wife. She then proceeded to her room, her head down. The next morning, Nani's parents arrived early. She had dark circles under her eyes and appeared to be experiencing another sleepless night. At night, Mary inquired of Nancy, who did not respond. She suggested that Mary should have departed from the situation the first time he had made his feelings clear. Joan informed his daughter that he was aware of this, but that he had wanted to win him back. He advised her to forget about him, as there were many other young men who would fall in love with her instantly. Mary responded angrily, stating that she had a few words for the man in question. She then suggested that he should be woken up. John, who was angry, advised her to leave. You'll waste your time if you pursue this course of action. I'm going to help you with the packing. You wanted to talk to Jack, who was coming down the stairs. You're a son of a bitch. He had worked very hard, putting in overtime, in order to bring in extra money so that he and his wife could purchase a house sooner than they had originally planned. While she may have engaged in some social activities with her friends or made some purchases on Saturdays that were slightly more frequent than he would have liked, he recognized that she needed to relax. He acknowledged his mistake and asked for forgiveness. What, then, is the appropriate response to such a situation? One might be tempted to cheat on one's spouse with the first person one meets and make one's spouse cry. Jack's love for Nancy remained unspoken, his gaze fixed upon John. Nancy grasped her father's hand and attempted to lead him upstairs to her room. From the moment John was introduced to the family, I sensed that he was not an ideal match for Nancy. Despite my reservations, I remained silent and hoped for the best. I was confident that Nancy was too deeply in love to let her feelings be swayed. Mary and I attempted to calm John, emphasizing the importance of focusing on more pressing matters. The mother and daughter took John by the arms and led him upstairs. Jack opened the door and observed John's van situated in the center of the driveway. He opted to traverse a distance of 2 blocks to the nearest cafe. 3 months later, on the eve of the hearing, Nancy took a few days of leave from her occupational duties, accompanied by her parents. They proceeded to she wished to spend some time at their summer cottage, as she felt the divorce would be granted by the judge and did not wish to attend the court hearing. She also sought to avoid being bothered by friends and colleagues. She requested that her parents turn off their mobile phones the following morning at 11 o'clock. At 10 o'clock, there was a knock on the door. All 3 individuals looked at each other, uncertain of the situation. Mary opened the door to Jack, who was standing at the entrance. Jack stated that he needed to speak with Nancy and requested the presence of her parents. John loudly demanded that Jack leave the property. Nancy was silent. She remained silent, uncertain of her next action. I attempted to contact her via telephone and even visited her residence. I presumed that all of her mobile phones were turned off. Jack stated, addressing Mary and ignoring John, I anticipated that you would all be present. He remained standing in the doorway. Nancy mustered the courage to inquire about the divorce that the judge had granted earlier that day at 10 o'clock. In the morning, as of today, we are single. You came all this way just to tell my daughter that you're single again. Mary raised her voice. So please leave before I am compelled to physically restrain you. John pointed a finger at Jack. My daughter has suffered for the last 3 months, and you came here today to exacerbate her distress. I suffered for 6 months, and no one ever noticed. Jack shouted, and everyone was stunned by Jack's sudden outburst. In a display of anger, he pushed Mary aside and entered the room. I never had a mistress, Jack snarled at Nancy. I never cheated on you, he continued, his voice rising. It was a setup, he said, his tone now calm. But why? Nancy was shocked by Jack's revelation. John and Mary were frozen in place, their expressions unchanging. Say the same thing, Jack prompted. You never cheated on me, Nancy replied, her voice trembling. She suddenly felt weak in the knees and collapsed onto a chair. Jack turned to his former father. In for the past 6 months, this has been engaging in sexual intercourse with her employer, Alan Perkins. The room was suddenly filled with an eerie silence. John and Mary were rendered speechless. They looked at their daughter, who was unable to meet their gaze and began to cry. All of those overtime shifts, girls' nights out, or Saturday shopping excursions were, in fact, instances of sexual intercourse with Mr. Perkins. I had a private detective following you, and I have DVDs to prove it. Many DVDs, please, John pleaded with Nancy. Tell me this isn't true. Tell me he's lying. I'm so sorry, Nancy cried out. I could have divorced you with all the evidence I had, but I wanted to do something to make you suffer. I wanted to make you feel what I felt. I wanted you to hurt. I wanted you to feel the pain. I wanted you to bleed. Jack spat. You did with him what you always refused to do with me. You know what I'm talking about. You allowed it. He humiliated me while he was inside you. You gave him what belonged to me. You disrespected me. You had no time for me, but you spent every free minute with him. You are the worst cheater I know. Nancy cried louder. Mary held her husband tightly. Turn on your phone. There should be hundreds of calls from work and Alan. Nancy frowned. She took her cell phone and turned it on. She had many missed calls and messages since we were still married. Yesterday, my lawyer filed a lawsuit against the insurance company. Alan Perkins's alienation of affection is still a crime in our state. Oh no. The lawyer filed a lawsuit against the insurance company, and Alan Perkins's alienation of affection is still a crime in our state. Nancy was visibly distressed, and her lawyer informed her that they could potentially receive up to 7 figures in damages. She was dismayed to learn that her affair would result in financial gain for Jack. Nancy checked her phone and saw numerous missed calls from her workplace and Alan Perkins. She also read the latest text message, which was from HR requesting her immediate attention. Nancy proceeded to scroll down to the message from Alan. It was evident from the tone of the message that he was extremely angry. Yesterday, Nancy had contacted Alan's wife and provided her with a set of the DVDs. In response, the wife had stated that she would ensure that Alan was removed from their lives and prevented from seeing their 2 children. She had even gone as far as to suggest that she would engage in sexual intercourse with Nancy in order to exact revenge. Nancy was informed that she could rely on the wife's commitment to this plan. Nancy was now single and therefore Alan had a family. Nancy was curious as to why she had been driven to this course of action. Nancy was informed that she had not taken any action herself, but that she had indirectly caused the breakdown of their relationship. Alan and I began a sexual relationship when I was living in his home. I have since informed him of my intention to move in with Mrs. Perkins for a period of time. My objective is to cause Alan distress by demonstrating that he will continue to bear the financial responsibility for the mortgage on his property while I engage in sexual relations with his wife in his own bed. John advised me that we should focus on addressing our own issues at this time. I have not yet concluded my discussion with you, Jack. John then informed me that the insurance company had terminated your employment. Alan also engaged in sexual intercourse with you outside of normal working hours and arranged for you to work overtime. It seems unlikely that he will be able to secure employment in the financial sector. Nancy was unable to make eye contact with Jack. Instead, she shook her head. On a related matter, a bag containing a set of your well-known DVDs was lost last month. However, this morning it was discovered that the DVDs had been uploaded to the internet with your names, phone numbers, and addresses. Jack responded with a smirk, indicating that he was unconcerned about being fired. You will secure roles in adult films. Nancy fainted. Jack proceeded to the door and faced John. This individual has no desire to interact with any of you and never wishes to see you again. That person is detestable. He can rot in hell.